Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Hello. Yeah, Narendra. Yeah, you are audible.
Okay. So my name is Narendra Misra, and I work as course instructor in MAD 2. And in the last term, I was course instructor for MAD 1. And today's agenda will be to create an API using Flask-RESTful. So we will be waiting for like 2-3 minutes to start. Let's see if some more people joins. Okay, so I will be using the Postman to test the API, and rest of the things I hope you guys already know. The additional thing which I'm going to use is Postman, and I'm not going to use the Replit. I will like publish this API on the Replit after the session ends. I'll be using my local machine to build the API. Yeah, I'll be using VS Code to make the files and write the code. Insomnia is not in my system, so I will not be able to use the Insomnia. Postman is fine. You can use Insomnia also to test. Are you guys able to unmute yourself?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So should we start now? Okay, I will share my screen. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah. Your screen
Okay.
is visible.
Okay. So the first question is, what is an API? So anybody wants to like give your view? What is an API? And what do you understand by the API?
An API is a platform which enables So I mean, which so that two application can interact with each other.
Yes, correct. So today we are going to build an API. So I'll start with the virtual environment. I hope everybody knows how to create the virtual environment. Then I will move to the live session, and then
Hello, sir.
yeah.
So, without an database interaction, can I call the interaction as API?
Yes. I mean, API is used to like fetch some data. Or it's not necessary that the API will always provide the data. I mean, there are a lot of API built in browser also. So today's agenda is RESTful API.
Sir, can you tell what are the other APIs and what is the difference between the like RESTful and those APIs in the like application sense?
Yeah, in the if you see the browser provides a lot of API, like the DOM API. So the DOM API is used to like manipulate the DOM. DOM means document object model. And there are other APIs also like local, like the web storage API. Web storage API allow you to like store the data inside your browser. And there are some more APIs like set interval or set timeout. This kind of this set interval API allow you to like run a function in certain time interval again and again. And set
Okay,
timeout, yeah.
is that API like the antivirus update auto updates time to time? Is there some API used or what is that?
In the antivirus, I mean, you don't need to call that API. I'm not sure whether it uses the API, but it should use the API.
Okay, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you, sir. I got the idea.
yeah,
So in most of the application in so maximum field is on RESTful API, right?
yeah. I mean, RESTful API is built like if you see the API is built in the browsers, then you are not making any request. Like, but in the RESTful API, you are communicating to the API through the HTTP. So the
Yes, yes.
RESTful, yeah, the RESTful API, it's like making a function call, but using the HTTP to make the function call. Like if you are making a post request, then you are making a function call to if you see your Flask application. So in the Flask application, you build the routes and you make a request to that endpoint. So what you are doing, you are making a function call to the view function that is associated with that route. Right, in some sense you are making a
Yes.
function, just making a function call. So but here you use the HTTP to make the function call, so you are bound to use the methods that HTTP provides, like the put, post, and get, this kind of methods, if you are using HTTP to make the function call.
Okay, okay. And sir, one last doubt. The like in this Zoom and like Amazon, they like this is the RESTful API is like stateless. But in case of Amazon Zoom, they need a stateful like
Yeah.
What is that API?
And I mean, API, basically in the web development world, the API you build to like decouple the front end and back end, in the sense
No,
that
no,
you,
no,
yeah,
sir. I'm asking that if I want to add the state property, then
yeah. So
which thing adds that?
you can use sessions.
Okay, okay, session. Okay, so session implements the
Yeah.
state property, right? Okay,
Yes. I mean,
okay. Then and
what
okay,
session
if
does is,
I
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
so please say, sir.
Yeah, yeah. What I was saying, that session creates a cookie inside your browser, which stores some specific data, like your information, like your user ID or something which identifies you. So using that
Okay,
information, you create. I mean, you create some kind of situation that I mean, the server identifies the client.
okay, okay. So got
Yeah.
it. So thank you.
Yeah, every time you make a request, that cookie will be sent with the request, and inside that cookie your information is stored, so the server knows that this request is coming from this client, so it will send you the response specific to the client.
Okay, sir. Got it.
Okay, so any other question? So then we will start. I will assume there is no question if nobody is asking. So the first thing first, I will create a file, requirements dot txt, inside this live session folder, and then in requirements dot, okay, I will add, so I will need Flask RESTful, and for the database, Flask SQL Alchemy. SQL SQL, and then after that I will install all this. Install R. So everything is installed now. So I will open the code editor. Okay. So I will need some more files. So I will create touch app.py. So before creating the API, you first, in order to host your API, you will need a server. So I will first create a Flask application. Flask SQL Alchemy is extension of the Flask. So the first thing you need to do is you need to create a Flask application. So I hope you guys know how to create a Flask application. Flask, and then you create a Flask instance. I'll call it app Flask. I'll pass the module name, and then let's create a endpoint in order to app.route. Let's call it, and the associated view function is, let's call it home. If home will not take any argument, and then it will just print hello. Hello, and then if name is equal to main, then run this application app.run, and then I'll keep the debug mode on. Debug. So, okay. So this is the simple setup of a Flask application. So I'll just run this application. Here, Python 3 app.py. So let's test whether it's working or not. I mean, I'll test it using this. So you can see it. If I will make a GET request to this, to the base URL, it will simply sends the HTML hello. And one thing I would like to show you, the headers, and our the header of our interest is content type. So if you see here, the server is sending a response which is of text/HTML type. I mean, the sent response was in HTML. So the by default Flask send the response which is of content type text.html. So I hope there is no issue till now. Is there any question till now? I'll assume there is no question then. Copy this. So in order to make, so I will create the API. So I will put all the functions related to API in resources folder, in resources file. Resources. Py. I am creating a resources.py file. So here is the resources.py. So in the resources file from Flask-RESTful import resource and API. So the way if you when you use the Flask SQL Alchemy, then at that point of time, if you remember, you extend a db.model class. So in the similar fashion, in the Flask RESTful, in order to create a resource, a blueprint for the resource, you extend the resource class. So the first thing you need to do is you need to create an API instance, API, and then you let's create a user resource. So what I'm doing here, I am extending the resource class, and my class name is user. So we will call that this is a user resource. And then inside that class, you define bunch of methods. So I will start with the get method. You pass the self keyword here, and let's return something. Hello from API. Okay, so what will happen when the user will send a get request for the user resource, this function will be triggered. I'll repeat myself again. When the user will send a get request for the user resource, this method will be triggered, and whatever this method will be returned to the user. So there is one more step in order to uh, I mean, there is one more step is remaining. So what you need to do, you need to register your user resource. In some sense, you need to map your resource with a URL, with an endpoint, so that the user can, if so that if, when the client wants to get the user resource, it will communicate using that URL. Okay, I'll just API add resource, and you pass the first argument is the resource name, and the second is the endpoint API/users. So whenever the client will send a get request to this endpoint, and if it will send the get request, this method will be triggered. So before that, we need to initiate that API. So how do you do it? First, we need to import from resources import API, and then API dot init app. So let me make a request from the postman /API/users. Okay. So what our API is sending, hello from the API. And this time, if you see the header, so the content type of this response is application/JSON. So if you use the Flask-RESTful, the default content type of the response will be application/JSON. So I will repeat myself again. So what is the process involved in making the API? So the first thing you need to do, you need to import the resource class and resource and API class, and then you create an API instance, and you extend the resource class, and you call it whatever the class name you give, it will, I mean, if you'll give the class name user, it will be called the user resource. And inside that class, you define bunch of methods, and the method name will handle that kind of request. Like if the method name is get, then it will handle the get request. Like if someone will, and then you register your resource using add resource function, and the first argument will be the resource name, and then second will be the endpoint at which the client needs to send request in order to access this resource. So if I'll show you the endpoint. So if this is the base URL, and after that it's slash API slash users. So when the UPI the client is sending request to API slash users, and if you see, I am sending the get request. You can see it from here. I'm sending the get request. So this function will be triggered, and whatever this function will return, that will be the response of that call. That will be response of that call. So for now, this get request is just returning a string hello from the API. So the response of this call is hello from the API. Is there any question?
Yeah, one question is that in that user class, that get definition.
Yeah.
So is this case sensitive or insensitive? Get.
Yeah, I guess it's case sensitive. Let me check. Yeah, it should be it should be like case sensitive. Yeah. Unimplemented method. So you need to keep your the method name in small letters.
Yeah, because on Postman you can see that the verb is showing as capital and here it's small. Okay, you have to keep in mind. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Like the lab assignments, if we have to implement the like more than one table, then we have to define more than one classes, right?
Yeah.
And the API, yeah,
corresponding to each table, there will be different resource. I mean, you will need to create the different resource, different class.
the get, post, put, and delete,
Yeah,
whatever is asked. Okay. And API dot as add resources will be the number of tables.
Yes.
Right, for each. Okay. Okay.
So hold on a second. So if you want to handle the post request, then you need to define another method, and this post. Okay. First of all, let me show you how this API responds if I'll send a post request to this endpoint. Okay. This method is not allowed for the requested URL. So if you want your API to handle the post method, you need to define another method called post self, and then return post. And now if I will make a post request, So now if I'll make a post request, it will say hello from the post. So for each kind of methods, you need to like define the method inside your resource class. So I will, let's say, put method. I will be modifying these methods, but for now I want to show that how do you like handle the different kind of requests. Put, and then similarly delete self. Oh, let me check whether server is running or not. Yeah. So now you will be able to send all kinds of requests. So if you want to, if you'll send the put request, it will say hello from the put. If you send the delete request, it will say hello from the delete. So we are able to send all kinds of requests to that endpoint. Okay. So let's say you want to pass some data, but you want to pass some data through the URL, like using the path parameter. So it is the passing the data is similar to the method is similar to the Flask. So how you do, you use this angle bracket, and then you use the converter, and then you give the name of your parameter. Okay, and other than I would like to show you that, but you can I mean you can define more than one path for a single resource. Like if you'll API slash users slash, so I am creating two endpoints. We don't call it endpoint. I am creating two paths for the URL. I mean for this resource. So if I will make a request to this URL, then this resource will be activated, and if I will make a request on this path, then even then this resource will be activated. What's wrong with this? So let me check whether it's working or not. So if I will make a GET request to this URL, I mean this server is, so if I am making a request to this URL, then it's saying hello from the API. If I'll make a request using the other URL, it will also, okay, then I will need to pass this variable ID. Let's say by default it's none. So you can see that hello from the API is coming from the API, and I am passing the parameter also, the path parameter also. Is it clear?
So what is the path parameter?
The path parameter is the parameter which you pass, which is like the path, which is a segment of the URL.
What's its use?
What it is, you are sending data through the URL. You are sending some data, like here I am using, I am sending one to the server using the URL.
And also, is it necessary to name it API/users, or can we give it another name?
1 second. Yeah.
So is it necessary to give API/users a
API
URL
API you can exclude. It's not compulsory to use /API.
and users? What's this users?
Users is denoting that I am making a request for the user resource. It's just a convention. The API says that this URL belongs to an API, and user says that this this endpoint belongs to a user resource. Okay, this is just a naming convention.
So if I give two paths with two different typecasts, say, then which one will get activated?
Different type. Yes.
So yeah, so you have given int, and again, so if you give the another path, say, you'll replace int with string, then which one will get activated?
I don't know. So you are saying like this?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess if you'll pass the string, then this will be activated, and if you'll pass the integer, even then it will.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, but in URL, inside the URL,
Yeah.
can we detect that which one is string and which one is integer?
Yeah, it's not it's the converter type means, so when you will send the request, it will try to convert it into that type. Like if you send the request, and then it will parse this segment, and if it will be able to convert it into the integer, then it
Yes,
will
yes,
send
yes.
the response. And if it will not be able to parse, if it will not be able to convert into the integer, it will throw 404. It's converter type.
Yes. So after coming into the path, it will convert it.
Yes.
It is not like it is taking as integer. It is
No.
taking, we don't know what format, but after taking it is it converts into integer, right?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
That's why we call it converter. So I guess the answer is, let's first remove this and try to pass a. Okay. So it will say 404 if, because we are using only this converter, int converter.
Yes, yes.
So let's say if I will use one more path, let's call it str, and let's try to send the request now. String.
It should be string. Huh?
If you'll send it like this, there is no issue. You can remove a string because by default it's a string. Let me check whether I. Okay. So what it is, then it will check for the other converters. Someone asked the question, na?
Yeah, got me. Thanks.
Yeah. So, come on, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So should we move forward?
Hello,
Sir,
sir.
actually,
Yeah, yeah.
Should I proceed? Should I ask
Yes.
a question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sir, in order to make an API, the codes written in app.py file,
Yes.
how they are bringing into role, means what's the role
Yeah.
of that?
I mean, the role of this, I mean, the API is hosted on some server, right?
Hmm.
So you need a server. So we are using this Flask server in order to run this, run the API.
But that app.root file, it's
Yeah.
nowhere playing a role.
App dot.
Route.
It is no. You can remove it. I just wanted to show you that by default, if you'll use the app dot route,
Hmm.
then the content type of the response will be HTML.
So route file, route line has no role, right?
No, you remove it. No issue.
Okay. Okay, thank you, sir.
It still work.
Okay, sir, thank you.
Yeah. Any other question?
So what does this line mean, API.init app?
So you are embedding the API, the resource file, the API instance. This one. You are attaching it to this application, this app.
So I don't understand.
I mean, Flask-RESTful is an extension, right? Extension to the Flask. So if you want to use the Flask-RESTful and you create an instance of this class, I mean API class, then you need to let your application know that I am using this API instance. So this is the line using which this application knows that there is an there is an API instance. I mean, this is similar to the Flask SQL Alchemy. So when you create a instance of Flask SQL Alchemy, you need to like let your application know that I'm using the Flask SQL Alchemy. You do similar kind of thing in the Flask SQL Alchemy also.
and sir, also you can say like
It's
one
like,
is initialization of a variable and passing the actual value.
yes. I mean, you are binding your API with this application using this line.
A little deviation from what you're saying. For the purpose of this, our assignment, so I have to keep two different file, app.py, research.py, or it's expected that I'll put everything in a single file?
I mean, you can keep it in different files. I don't think there will be any issue.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, for assignment, we should put all the things in one file, right? It is mentioned in the assignment.
You have to write the resources also in the one file. I
Okay.
don't think so. I mean, if it's being told, then you should keep all your things in one file.
Because I told sir, because in the zip format guideline, it says that we should select the app.py file and that then put it into a zip file. Then we should submit that zip. So that's why I thought that we should not submit any other file with app.py.
I think it will work if you even if you will create different file for the resources and the models, and you integrate all those files inside this app.py, still it will work.
Okay.
So if the deadline is not over, you can try once.
Yes, sir, that is better.
Yeah. So should we move forward? Okay, I'll show how you can, like, if you'll return this ID from here, so you'll say that you'll see that the API is responding, I mean, will respond with the ID. And the reason why I'm emphasizing on this ID, because I want to show you that you can send some data through the URL using this syntax. You use the angle bracket, and inside the angle bracket you specify the converter. If you will not specify the converter, it will take it as a string, and then you will specify the name of your parameter, and whatever you will pass in the URL, it will be stored inside this variable ID, and then you can access this ID inside your methods. So let me,
Sir, does that ID equal to none have to be changed?
which one?
Uh,
ID is equal to none.
yeah.
So I am saying that the default value of ID is equal to none.
Okay.
Yeah, the reason why I'm saying, because maybe someone will not send the ID.
Okay, sir.
So in that case, the value of ID will be none. So now if you see, I have sent the GET request, and I have I have assigned the value of the ID as whatever the name is, Narendra, and the API is responding with that value, because I'm just returning that value from the API.
So what happens if you don't write your name? Like if you just write API users?
I mean, if you'll remove it, then it will send null. If you pass 1, it will return 1.
Is that one a string or integer, sir?
Yeah, it will be cached by this integer. Yeah.
So why it will be integer, like why not a string?
Yeah, I guess I mean, it doesn't matter. It is being cached by this one or this one, but I think it is being cached by this one, because it the way it should work is it should go to this URL and check whether this matches this URL, the request. I mean, by which you does it match with the URL which which client is using, and if not, then it will go to the other URL and check whether it matches with this URL or not. And then if the match will not happen, then it will go to the next URL and check whether this is being matched by this URL. And if it will match with none of the URLs, then it will throw 404.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I will write these things here also. Okay, so what I want to do now, I want to integrate. Now I want to use the database. I want to use these methods in order to manipulate the database. I mean, in order to manipulate the table. I want to, okay, and can someone tell me what is the rule of get request put and delete? Where should we use it?
It is used to retrieve any HTML file.
I mean, HTML file is not necessary.
I mean,
You
like
can,
any resource, like they want, it just,
yeah, retrieve the resource.
yes, sir.
And post is to create the resource, put is to
Update
modify
the
the
resource.
resource, update the resource, and delete is to delete the resource. This is the common convention.
So post can be used to update as well, right?
Yeah, you can use the post to update as well, but generally put is used to update the resource. Okay, so now what I will do, I will create a SQL Alchemy I mean models file. What I will do, I will copy TP. In this folder. So what I have done, I have copied two files, models.py. I mean, it's a simple model. I hope you guys are like familiar with the SQL Alchemy. It's just a SQL Alchemy. You import the SQL Alchemy and then create an SQL Alchemy instance. And then you create the user model class. And this user will have three attributes: ID, username, and email. Okay, and I have also like created this test.db. I hope it's fine. There is not much in this file to explain. I think you already know what this SQL Alchemy and what this db.model is.
Yes, sir.
So you guys know or not?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir,
Okay.
Please
what are
continue.
those two lines?
Which
Last
one?
2 lines. in model?
Last two lines, when you will print a user object, it will just print user and then the username. It's the representation of the user object. If you'll remove this, it will not affect it anyway. It was just saying that if you will print the user object, it will write like this. Okay, I'll just uncomment it. And if you will print the user object, it will write like this: user, and then whatever the username is. Let's say it's Mohit. It's just representation of an user object. It's just used for the type. I mean, when you'll print, it will be used when you print this user object. It's just for the printing, nothing else. There is no role of this REPR class. It's a dunder method. I guess it will be printed like this. If you will create a user instance using the username Mohit, and if you'll try to print that instance, it will print in this format, nothing else. It will be triggered, this method will be triggered when you will use the print statement.
So how it will be triggered by print statement?
And let's say you create a user instance with some ID, or if you'll not pass the ID, it will automatically assign an ID. I mean, okay, I will write it here. So let's say if I will ask you to create a user instance, then how you create username is equal to, let's say, Mohit, and then the next thing you will do, username is equal to Mohit, and email is equal to mohit@gmail, and after that, if so, you have created a, and let's say user1 is equal to, so this is how you create a user instance, right? In the Python, it's the Python syntax. If you are using a class, then this is how you create an object of this class. And if you'll use this print user1, here I int, print this user1, then this will come on your whatever you are using, whatever interface you are using. If you are using the command line, this one will be printed. And this is being called when you use the print statement.
Is it because the function is inside the class? That's
Yeah.
why if you write two functions, then both of those functions would be called, or different.
Two function means related to this user class.
Yeah, if we write two functions, like
Two func-
representation
two
and
func-
then below it another function.
So if you'll create the another function, the name will be different. Nah?
Yes. Then which one will it call when we write print?
So you want to create another function with the same name.
Another name.
Another name, then that will not be triggered. This function is being triggered by the Python.
Is there a convention that REPR function is triggered by print?
Yes. I mean, this is the Python syntax.
Okay.
You search on the internet underscore REPR, then it will I mean, it will be shown that this function is triggered when you use the print statement.
Okay, so yeah. Sure.
So I hope you guys know what this class is, what db.model is. Now, in order to use this db instance, I need to initiate with it with this init app again. From models, import, what is it, db and then app.config. I hope you guys know that app.config is required in order to use the database. You need to give the database URI. SQL Alchemy database URI is equal to SQL test.db. So it says that it tells the application that the database which we want to use is test.db, which is located inside this folder. So now we can use this SQL, this database. Okay. So what I want to do, I want to let me do one thing. Let me show you what is inside this database. Okay. Test.db tables. So we have one table which is called user, and let's check whether there anything inside this table. Select star from user. Okay, user side. User. Select SELECT star from user. So inside that user table, there is only one entry, which name is Harendra and the email ID is mahendra@gmail.com and ID is 1. So for now, inside our application, our application is using this database test.db, and this is the model for the table, which is user. This is the model for the user table. So what we are going to do, we are going to send a post request and add an entry to our database. So if we'll make a post request, the first thing we need to do, we need to parse the request. Like what we need to pass the data sent by the request. So for that we will use request parse module. And then user request is equal to request parse dot request parser. I'll explain what this request parser does. Request dot add argument username type is equal to int and help is equal to help. str. And then similarly, I will add another argument, and its name is email, and type is still str. User. Email is a string. And then inside this post method, user dot request dot parse args, and I will call it data, and then I will, for now, let's return this data. So what this parser request parser does, so when you are making a request, you are sending some data with the request, right? If you'll send some post request, then you are asking the server to create a resource inside the database. So you need to parse that request and convert it into the dictionary and use that dictionary in order to manipulate the table. I'll just make a request and then I will demonstrate you two guys. If you make a post request. So now with the post request, I am sending this data. Okay. So you can see that the server is sending that data back. So what happened here? So with the request, you sent the data, username and email. Okay. So the request parser object. So the user request will parse that request and create a dictionary with the key username and the username which is sent by the client will be stored as the value of the key username, and the similar thing will happen with the email. I will just write this as a comment. It will create a dictionary user request which will look something like this. User name, username, and whatever the request you will send. Let's say I'm sending and then email, okay. So this request parser will parse the request and then create a dictionary like this. And then what you are doing, you are using this parse args, you are accessing that dictionary and storing it inside the data and then returning that data back. And what this add argument does, it creates a key with the username and checks whether it can be converted into the string. If it can be converted into the string, then fine. Otherwise, it will send it will throw an error with the message that user is a string. Let's say I will change it to integer, and let's send the same request. Yeah, what I did, I changed the type into int. So it will check, it will validate whether the incoming request can be converted into the string. If not, then it will throw an error with the message which is specified inside the help. So this is parsing the request and also validating the request. Is it clear? Yeah.
Sir, if the number of arguments are more or less than what we have defined, will it throw an error?
More or less? No. If you'll send one more, let's say I will remove this one. That's what you are saying. And if I'll send a request which will have the username, so how will it handle?
Yes,
Is
sir.
it what you are asking? So I think it will not throw an error. Yeah. It will just ignore that argument.
Okay, it kinds of work like key.
Yeah. But this the parse args dictionary which it creates, the request parser creates the dictionary that will have only one argument then, as you can see in the response. Is it clear? And let's say what I will do, I will add one more option here. Required is equal to true. So it will also check that the incoming request has this argument or not. Like if you are sending the request, then the request body should have an email. So if I'll send this request, then there will be no issue, because I am if I'll send the request now. Okay, what is problem?
So there is a typo in required.
REQUIU. Let me rerun the application. So if I'll send the request, there is no issue, but let's say I will remove this email, then it will send a message. It will throw first of all, it will throw a 400 error that it's a bad request. The email is required. So it's not only parsing the data, the request, it also validating the request. Okay. So is it clear what is the role of this request parser? So there are two things it is doing. It is parsing the request and then it's validating the request. So I'll uncomment this.
Yes, sir. In the screencast, sir has used something as @marshal with.
Yeah, I'll come to it. Like the Marshall with is used to like send the response. Okay, we will be using that Marshall with. Don't worry. From models, import user and DB. So now I will be manipulating the database. The first thing I will do, I will create the entry inside the database using the post request. So for that we need the model here. So inside the model there is a class user and the DB. Because the name of our resource is also user, so I need to like reassign the name as user model and DB. So what I will do, I'll create a user is equal to user model and with username is equal to data dot username and email is equal to data dot and then add to the session db dot add db dot session dot add. I will add this user to the session and then commit the session. Commit. Okay, and then I will send the user now. Now if I will go to the postman and send a post request. Okay, username is string. I have not changed it. Username type string. Okay, here username and email and resources. Username is equal to data dot username, email is equal to data dot email. What's the issue?
So data is a dictionary, right? So
Yeah. Username user. Let me copy this name.
So will the square bracket help?
I mean, it doesn't matter. Is it a string or no? USERMODER. Let me check. What is the
So,
error?
why the app.py is showing in red color?
Where?
The app.py is showing in red
Yeah.
color. Is there
There,
any error?
yeah, that's what I'm looking for. App.py. Yeah, it's saying from models import models db imported. Okay, models is not being used. Okay, I have not initiated here. That's why the error. db dot init app. Okay. So now that error is gone, but there is a new error. It says that object of type user is not JSON serializable. So can anybody explain what is the problem? It says that the response is not JSON serializable. So you saw in the beginning, I showed you that the response is always a JSON, right? The content type. Okay. Okay, this time it came HTML, but if the request is successful, then it will send you the JSON data, right? By default, the Flask-RESTful always sends a JSON response. So what happens if some data is not JSON serializable? That's what it's saying, that the Flask-RESTful is not able to convert the data user in the JSON format.
The user is object.
Yeah,
Python
user is a
object.
custom object. That's why error is coming. It says that object of the type user is an object, it's a custom object, and it is not JSON serializable. So we need to do something. So that's where the Marshall width comes. So the Marshall width is used to convert a custom object. Marshall width converts a custom object to a JSON serializable object.
So what does JSON serializable means?
JSON serializable means you can convert it in the JSON.
So it can be text or HTML.
Yeah, HTML cannot, I don't know, HTML string can be converted into the JSON string, and dictionary can be converted into the JSON string. Array can be converted into the JSON string, but the custom object cannot be converted into the JSON string. So anything that cannot be converted into the JSON string is not JSON serializable. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Sir, I have another doubt. What is the Werkzug or this error? So I don't know the spelling, like Werkzug or Workzug error. What is that?
Workzug error. Workzug is related to the what you say, the security. So it's one of the module that the Python uses. The Workzug. Workzug
Do
is one
we
of Python. The Flask uses the Workzug. The Workzug module for the security.
Okay, and it is not necessary to use it in the API, right?
For
In that screencast, professor used this, so that's why I'm asking that is it necessary or we can
no, you can skip this.
okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
I mean, this the Flask uses by default.
Okay, okay.
I mean, if there is something which Flask doesn't provide, but then I mean, but you need to accomplish that task. I mean, if you want to accomplish some security related thing, and that kind of functionality is not built in the Flask, built into the Flask, then you will require to use that object security. But for this session, you will not require that. I'm not saying that you should not use that module in, I mean, you should never use that module. That this is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for this session, it is not required.
Yes, sir, got it.
Yeah. So what we need to do, we need to convert this user object into some object that can be serialized into the JSON. So for that, we will need fields module, and yeah, fields module and Marcel with decorator. So the first thing we need to do, we need to create a template. We need to create a template for the response. For by the template for the response, I mean that you need to create a dictionary like structure to which this user object will be mapped. I will demonstrate, then you will understand. User field is equal to username fields str string and then email fields dot. Okay. So what I'm saying, if you see the structure of the user data, then it looks something like this. There is a username and there is an email. So this dictionary will be used to convert this user data in a JSON serializable object. I mean, what I am trying to say that it will take a user object and fetch the username from that user object and assign it as the value of this username, and then it will take the email of that user object and assign the value of this email property, assign and use it as the value of this email property. Is it clear? So this dictionary will be used for that purpose. What Marcel will, I'll just write that and then demonstrate. Marcel with, and then write the so what this line says that it is asking the program to Marcel the return statement of this post method to use this user field dictionary in order to convert the user object into a JSON serializable object. If you, I'll run this and then show you. So now if I'll send a request, I'll have to change this data because now if you see that the response is coming in this format, username and email. So what it did, so this if you will send the request with this body username and email, what it is doing, it is creating a user object using this dictionary, where the username is Marendra and email is Mohit. Email is mohit@gmail.com, whatever it is. And then that, so, and if I'll send that object directly, then our like our server will say that the object is not JSON serializable. So what we are doing with the with the Marshall with, we are converting that user object in a JSON serializable object, and that JSON serializable object is using this dictionary to convert that user object in a dictionary like a structure. Am I clear? So let's say I will remove this email from here, and then if I'll make a request again, I'll have to change something. Now if I'll send a request, the result is only username. So it's not only converting the user object in some JSON serializable object, it's also filtering the data. Is it clear?
So filtering the data means?
Filtering the data means if the response will only send those data which is being mentioned inside this dictionary. Like if you use only username, then even if the user object has the email, it will not that will not be sent in the response.
Okay.
Okay, only username will be sent. So you'll have to mention all those fields that you want to send back to the client. Is it clear?
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yeah.
How would it know, like just say, like when we are passing the data to the API, like can you open Postman?
Yeah.
Like if we change the order, like first we type email and then username, how would Marshall with know like which one is email and which one is username? Like, would it be able to know that, or like that's not possible?
Yeah, Marshall with has nothing to do with this request data.
Okay.
Marshall with is dealing with this user object. So Marshall with we are using to convert this user object in a JSON serializable object.
Okay. So let's say the user object which is being returned.
Yeah.
If that user object has like the order is like changed somehow, like okay,
Yeah,
like
it
how would
doesn't
it know?
matter.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter because it will just check the user. This user object has a property called username, right?
Okay.
User object
So
does
that is
not.
being checked by like the field strong something.
Yes. So if you
Yes.
see the user class, it has
Mhm.
two properties: username and email.
Yes, sir.
So the user object will have two properties: username and email, right? So it will match with this username and will extract that data from that user object and assign the value of value of that username to this username property. So even if you
Oh,
write email, yeah, even if you write email here, it will not like affect.
okay, got it. I thought it is just like converting it into a like, dictionary, like the email and like giving it the value fields. Like I didn't know like what fields dot string did.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you'll send the response now, the only thing happened will inside the response, the email will come first. But it will not happen that the username is assigned in the email and the email is assigned in the username. That will not happen. So let's see. Okay. Now what happened? Okay. So duplicate. So when I'm sending the request, I'll have to change something in there. Now if I'll send the request, so you'll see that the email will come first, but the value of this email will be the email of the user object.
So what does
Okay, sir, got it.
what does fields.string works here?
Yeah, the fields is fields is a like module, and fields or the string just says that this email is a string.
If we have different data types, we have to change it as well.
Yes. If this is an integer, let's say, let's create one more field ID, and then I will write it fields dot, then I will have to write integer because this is integer. And then if I'll send the request, I'll have to change something here. Okay. So it will also send you the ID, and ID is an integer. There is no quotation mark here.
If the data is different data type, will it throw an error?
I guess not. Let me. Even if it throws the error, I don't know what kind of error it will be. I don't mind the name and email now. Yeah, it's throwing an error. Invalid literal for int with base 10. It will throw an error. It's similar kind of. It has the similar kind of behavior. It will try to convert it into the integer.
So can't we just use something like fields only?
So I don't think so. So you want to say you don't want to like write this dot integer?
Yes, mentioning the data type without mentioning the data type.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's check. Yeah, has no attribute. You'll have to write the data type there. Is it okay?
Yes, okay, clear.
Okay. So you now know what is the role of this user field and what is the use of, I mean, what is the role of this Marcel width? Marcel width is being used to convert the custom object into the JSON serializable objects. So if the object is JSON serializable, so then there you don't need to use the Marcel width. Otherwise, you will need to use this Marcel width. And for the Marcel width, this dictionary is necessary, and the way you create this dictionary using this fields module. And now what I will do, okay. So now let's work on the get request. And one more thing I would like to, so when you are sending the response for the post request or any request, you can also specify the status code of the request. Like if you'll say, so when you are sending, I don't think this is the right place, because every time I'm sending the post request, I need to change the data because of the database, the structure of the table, the schema of the table. Because if you see the schema of the table, it says that the unique is true. So if I will not send the unique, the distinct data, it will just throw an error. The database will throw an error. So what I will do, I'll do rest of the things inside the get request. So inside the get request, so I will be sending the ID. So I will be using this ID to fetch the data. What I will do, I will create a user object. Okay, user model dot query, user model dot query dot get, and I'll pass the ID here, and then I'll check if the user is in the database. If I will use the get, I mean user dot query dot get, if the user of that ID doesn't exist in the database, it will simply return none. Right. So I can use that information to check whether the user exists in the database or not. So if the user doesn't exist, the value of the user will be none. So if user will be false. And if there is something, if there is a user with that ID, then this value will not be none. This will be some object. So the value of this user will be true. So if user, then return this user. But if I will not, okay, let's forget about this. So else for now, let's return data does not exist. User will be much appropriate. So but the same thing will happen if the user exists, the user of that ID exists, the get method will try to return a user object, so it will throw an error that the user is not JSON serializable. So what we will need to do is you will need to use the Marcel width decorator. Okay, and let's send a request, get request. Now I'll send a get request API user/1. If you see, if I'm sending the get request, it's returning the data related to the user related to that ID. I'll change the ID to it will return the data related to that ID. Okay, so what I wanted to show two more things to you guys. So when you are sending the response, you can also specify the status code in the response. Like what you need to do, you need to just pass the status code. So if you'll see right now the status code is 200. Okay, right? So if I want, I can change the status code. Let's say I will write it 400. So next time when I will send the get request, the status will be 400 byte request. So you can manipulate the status code also. Is it clear? Any question?
Sir, can we also edit the status code message? Like now it is bad request. Can we also edit that?
Yeah, I don't think so. That cannot be edited because the Flask is using the HTTP exception, and the message. I mean, I guess we can change the message, but we cannot do it using this. I mean, this get method. I mean, the way we are doing, it's not possible to change that message. You'll need to do some more work.
Okay.
Because the default message associated with the 400 is the bad request. And other than that, you can also modify the header. Like if you want to set a header, let's say author name. Author name. So now if I'll make a request, so you'll see that there will be a header name, author name. So you can also set the header using when you are like returning this response object. Is it clear?
Sir, how is header different from body, response body?
I mean, there are two sections in the response. One is header. Header is for like machine to read. You don't display it in on the screen. If you see the HTML, so when you create the Flask application or when you visit any web page, you don't see the header. So the body of that response will be rendered by the browser. So generally the header is for the developers and the machines. Machines use it to like read the data. If you see the content type header, think about the content type header. Content type header, by the content type header, the server says to the client that the content of type of my response is application.json. So the client, the browser can read that message that the content type sent by the server is application.json. So I need to parse the information. I mean, it accordingly. And if the content type set by the server is html text slash html, then the browser will get the message that the type of the content that server is sending me is of the HTML. So it will act on that content based on that content type. I mean, it will render it as a HTML. Basically, the headers are for the browsers, for the machine to read. I mean, this is the extra information about the content.
Okay, sir, got it.
Yeah.
Sir,
Yeah.
so I didn't get what the return user, comma 400 and the author name doing. Like, what's the role of 400 and the author name here?
So using 400, you are changing the status code of the response. So initially, if you remove the 400 and author code, so by default, the Flask-RESTful is will send the status code 200. Let me send the request. So the by default it's 200. Okay, but let's say for any reason you want to change the status code. You don't want to send 200. You want to send the 201. Okay, and also you want to change the you want to send some extra information inside the header. So let's say author name, I'll just do the same thing. So now if I'll send the request, you see that there is one additional header that says the author name is Narendra, and now the status code of the response is 201. Initially, when I was not using that 201, then the status code was 200.
Okay, sir. And one more doubt. Are we supposed to write @Marshall with before every function, or is it okay to write only once?
No, before every function. Before,
Okay,
I mean, the Marshall with is not necessary. If you want to convert the return statement of the function in JSON serializable object, if it's already JSON serializable, you don't need to use the Marshall with. But if it's not JSON serializable, this is a tool you can use to to transform a non-JSON serializable object in a JSON serializable object. So it applies on the return statement.
Okay, sir. Understood.
Sir, how do you identify if an object is serializable or non-serializable?
The serializable objects are like fixed. So you can convert the string into anything that can be converted into a JSON into the JSON string is called JSON serializable.
Okay, sir. Thanks, sir.
Sir, would it give any errors if the object is like JSON serializable?
No. It will not throw an error. If let's say instead of user, I'll just send username. This is a dictionary, and dictionary can be converted into the JSON string using JSON.dumps. If you guys know, I guess you guys would have encountered JSON.dumps. So JSON.dumps, what the JSON.dumps does, it takes the dictionary and convert it into a JSON string. So a dictionary can be converted into the JSON string. So it is JSON serializable. So now the return statement is JSON serializable. So the Marshall with will do nothing. It will not throw an error. Yeah, the username is Narendra, but email is null because I'm just using the username here. And when the JSON serializable, when the Marshall with use the user fields to map that object to the JSON serializable object. So it is ID field and username, and inside this return statement, I'm just using the username. So in for the username, it will get the value Narendra, but for the email and ID, it will not get a value. So for the default value, the default integer value will be 0, and for by default, the string value will be null.
Okay, sir. Sir, is there a syntax for like for sending the return object and then the status code and the header? Like, is it so like the first the object has to be sent and then the status code and then the headers? Is it so, sir?
Yeah, it's like this. You first, the first argument will be sent in the body. So this will be sent in the body, and the second argument will be the status code, and the third argument will be header.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Anything else? So I wanted to discuss some more things. So I will. So let's say with the request, with the response, you want to send the URL of this resource also. So you can do it easily. You just need to use the fields.url. Fields.url. So if you'll use the fields.url, it will send the URL also of the resource. Okay. Now, if you see the URL is also URL corresponding to this resource is also like in the response body. So if you want to send, it's the relative URL. So if you want to send the absolute URL, you can also do it. Absolute. So now you can see the URL of this resource is also included in the response. You can explore more about the user about the fields from the documentation. Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to discuss, the abort function. The abort function is used to throw an exception, an HTTP exception. Like let's say you, I mean the client is sending a request for the user object with a given ID, and that doesn't exist. So you don't want to send 200 OK. What you want if, okay, let me remove this. What I'm saying, if not user means if the user doesn't exist, then abort this program here with the 404, I mean resource not found, and with the message user does not exist, exist, yeah, exist, and if and else return user. So now what will happen if the user doesn't exist? It will just terminate the program. It will throw an HTTP exception with the status code 404 and message user does not exist. And if the user exists, it will return user. Just Yeah. And if I'll write the 20, then the 20, I have not created the 20 resources. So it should throw message user does not exist. And if you see the status code, it's 404. So the abort is used to like throw an HTTP exception. And the first argument will be the status code, and the second argument will be, I mean, the message value will be sent as the message in the response. It will be sent in the body of the response, and this will be the status code. So this is ideally your application should should respond. Is there any question about the abort? Because we are going to use all these things. I mean, I don't have any other concepts to like cover. I have already covered all the concepts.
So one request,
Yeah.
is it possible to share this code, whatever
Yeah,
written
yeah.
here?
Yeah, I will share the code. I guess you guys understand all the concepts, like how to marshal the response, and how to like parse the request, and how to validate the request using the request parser, and how to like convert the object which is not JSON serializable in the JSON serializable object. And if you want to throw an HTTP exception, you can also use the abort method. So these are the concepts which we use in order to like build the API.
So do we have to import a bot from somewhere, or like is it?
No, it's you have to import it from Flask-RESTful.
Oh,
It's part of
Flask-RESTful.
it's part of
Okay.
it. And one more thing I wanted to show, it's not that you always have to use Marshall with decorator, because sometimes what happens okay, let me say why I'm saying that it's not necessary that you will have to use Marshall with decorator. Let's say you want to send different kind of response according to the different needs. Like let's say you in some situation you don't want to use you don't want to marshal the return statement, like the status code, error code. Let's say if you want to send the error code and you are not using the abort statement, you are just returning that error code. So in that situation you don't want your error. Okay, let me show you why I'm saying. Get method. Okay, name Ajit. And if I will make a request for 2. So what I'm saying, it will always format your response in terms of this dictionary. Even if you want to return some different thing, like if you want to return some different object, different JSON serializable object, it will, I mean, you will not be able to return that thing. Let's say I want to, in some situation, I want to return this one, I mean, this kind of dictionary, but the Marshall width will always be applied on the return statement. So it will only filter those keys which are inside this dictionary. So even if you want to return name is equal to Ajit, you will not be able to respond with this dictionary. So this is also a problem. So what you can do, you can, instead of using this Marshall with decorator, you can use Marshall directly. Marshall directly. Why I'm saying that? So what you can do, Marshall and user, and then user field. User field. So, and I'll remove this Marshall with decorator from here. And return, let's say I am saying name AJWT. So if I'll send a request now, I'll explain why I am showing you the Marshall only, not the decorator. So if I am sending the request, it's working similar to the Marshall with, right? But I'm not using the decorator. And what is the benefit of using only Marshall, not the decorator? If I'll send the, if I am not, I mean, if I will be able to send some response which is differently formatted. So if I will I am using Marshall, so I am able to respond with the two different kind of object. This object has the different key value and this object has different key value. But if I will use the Marshall with decorator, then, and I will return user. Then if I will make a request, you see, even if the ID doesn't exist, it is sending the format of the response is always ID, email, and username. This Marshall with will be applied to every return statement. So if you want to send a response, if you want to send a response which is of different format, then that will cause a problem. So in that case, if the format of a response is always of the same kind, then you can use the decorator. If you want to send different, different kind of response, then you can always use Marshall. Marshall and then user and then user field. Is the aim clear why I'm using Marshall, not the Marshall with?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So all the other things are like similar. You can, all you need to do is like implement the put request. You know all the concepts related to this API. And so if you want to implement the delete request, what you will do, you will just, you'll get the ID and then implement the procedure that you follow in order to delete a resource from the database. Like what you do, user, first thing you need to check if the ID is, if the ID is given, because if the ID will not be given, you will not be able to identify the resource which you want to delete. So first thing need to check if ID is given, then you fetch the resource. User is equal to user model dot use a query dot get and then you pass the ID and then dv dot session dot delete and then you pass the user object and then commit the session dot commit and then so the commit, if the session is committed, then you return data user deleted with the 200 status code, and if the ID does not exist, else you can abort the program with 404 status code that the user no 404 400 means the I mean the user the server is not able to understand your response because you didn't send the ID, so he doesn't know which resource to delete. So you, in that case, you can always respond with the 400 status code. So message is equal to user ID required, and here you also need to check whether the ID given, I mean the user with that ID exists or not. So if not user, then abort with 404 that user doesn't exist. Message is equal to user does not exist. So if you'll abort the program, the control will not go to this line. So you don't have to worry about this thing. So let's say I want to delete some resource from here. So I'll send the delete request to the 20. So the user does not exist. It says the user does not exist because the ID was given. So it will come, I mean, the control will come inside this block, and then it will check for the user ID. It will like query the database and ask for the user with the ID 20. But what will happen? The database doesn't have that 20, doesn't have a user which has the ID 20. So the control will come here. I mean, it will come inside this block, and inside this block, abort statement is here. So it will throw an error with the message user does not exist. So if you want to, if I will not give the, if I will not pass the ID, then it will say that the user ID is required. So, and if I will pass the ID, valid ID, it will delete the user deleted with the 200. Okay, now if I want to get the resource with the ID 2, it will only say name is equal to Ajit, and the reason why it's saying name is equal to Ajit because I handled it like this, but ideally it should be abort 404 with the message user does not exist. So, and one more feature I would like to show you about this Marshall with thing. For now, let's leave it like this. And Marcel with, I will use the decorator Marcel with. What I will do, if the client is sending the ID, then I will fetch the data with that specific ID. If the client is not passing the ID, then I will return all the users from the database. So if ID query.id, if, so I will put everything in this block. If the ID is given, then it will handle the request like this. If the ID is given, it will fetch the data of that given ID, the user of that given ID, and return that. If the user doesn't exist, it will throw 404. If the user exists, it will return the user. Otherwise, what it will do, user is equal to user model dot query dot all query dot all. So it will fetch all the data and return user. So let's say I will send a request without the ID. So I will remove the ID and send a GET request. So you can see that the in the response, all the I mean all the resources has been returned. Like it has it is a list of all the users. So the Marcel with not only work on the single resource, it acts on the list of resources also. Is it clear?
So can we use any error code with abort function, or is it
Yes.
just
No, it should be a valid HTTP status code.
for custom error codes? What should we do?
For the custom error, that's why I was showing you the Marcel. I was showing you that you can use Marcel. You can return it inside the body.
Yes, but we cannot have message for that.
No, you can have message for that. You just have to return a JSON object.
Yeah, but that would be a JSON object. Like we can like take that as a status code, but actually that wouldn't be a status code, right, sir?
Yes, anything that status code is already like predefined, and you cannot create your own status code. Error code is like custom error codes are just like the JSON object. JSON string. Let's say I'll try one thing. Let's say I want to send this status code. So do you think it will work? It will not work because this is not a valid status code. Let me first check whether the okay, but I need to write some. Yeah, you see, it says that lookup error, no exception for whatever it is written. I mean, you cannot send your custom status code. You cannot create your own like status code. It's already defined, and each status code has a meaning. Error code has a meaning. Like 404 has a meaning that resource you were looking for was not found. I mean, you can like throw the customized error, HTTP error. It's not a problem, but you cannot manipulate the status code. It's already
Okay,
defined.
okay.
Yeah, you can learn in the HTTP exceptions class. You can extend. You can create your custom error. You can throw an error, but
Yes, we have that in this week.
yeah. And all this and all the other things you just need to like implement. Put, what is the use of put method? You just update the resource. So all you need to do is once the request comes, you just need to check whether the ID was given or not. If the ID was not given, then you cannot update a resource, update the resource, because you will not be able to identify the resource without the ID. So the first need to check whether the ID was given. If the ID was not given, you just need to abort that resource there and send a error, send and throw an error with 400 status code that the ID was not given. If the ID was given, then you just update that resource. And you know how to do, if you know the SQL alchemy. Else, should I implement it, or you will be able to implement?
So one thing I found the problem here, I cannot update. I can delete and then add it again. So is that correct, or there is
No,
something-
you can update. I'll just
Yes.
implement this update thing. So the first thing you need to check whether the ID is given or not. If not ID, I'll just abort the request with the 400 with the message is equal to ID is not given. And if else, if the ID is given, what you need to do, you just need to fetch the data. So user is equal to user model. No. So the first thing we need to do is we need to call this, where is the get request parser. Where is, okay. So I hope you guys remember that request parser. It will parse and validate the request and then convert it into the dictionary, and then you can use that dictionary. So user is equal to okay, battery is low. So user model dot query dot filter by and then ID is equal to whatever the ID is given. You take that user and then you check if the user exists. If not user dot first I hope you guys know the filter by. It filters the data based on this condition. It will take the ID and filter the data with that ID, and user dot first, it will just fetch the first data. So if there is a data with that ID, if there is no data with that ID, I'll just abort the program and will say that the data does not exist. User does not exist, and else what I will do, I will user dot update. I will use this user dot update and update with this data b, and user dot, and then db dot session dot commit. So what I will user, you took the user, you filter it by ID and check for the first element. If there is an element, if there does not exist an element, you threw a 404, and if it exists, then you update the content of that user with the request, the payload of the request, and then you committed that session, and then you can return let's return the user again. So if I'll, and with the status code 200, so because I will be returning this user object which is not JSON serializable, so I'll have to use this Marshall with. So let's try this. First thing I will need to do, I'll need to run this application, and then I will send the put request. Let's start with the 2000. How is that? User does not exist because we have we have supplied the user ID, but the user ID doesn't exist, so it will say that user does not exist. So then if I will not pass the ID, it will say ID is not given. But if I will pass a valid ID, let's say 3, and I'm going to modify the user with the ID 3. So let's say I'll call it Ajit and email the Gmail. Okay, what happened now? Okay. User update, where is it? Put user dot first, because user is a query object, so it should be a user object. So in order to convert it in the Marshall with, so I'll send the request again. So now you can see it has updated the user data with the sent payload. ID is equal to 3, the email Ajit, and this is all we sent in the payload, Ajit and this one. So it's updated. Let's say I will send a GET request for this user. So it's been updated. Is it clear now?
Yeah, so this is clear. So I have one different question, not about this API.
Yeah.
The question is on line number 52,
Yeah.
written that users are fast, but if we
Yeah.
have to user then within square bracket 0. So will that give the same result, or what's the difference between that and this?
No. I think the filter by will return. If you see the return of the filter by method, it returns a query object.
It's a query object, but it's ultimately it's a list. And when you're running this method, the first method is giving the first object from that list. So if you just run that square
No.
bracket,
What I'm saying. Okay, let me try. But I don't think it is a correct thing to do, because that list. I mean, even if it's a list, it is not the list of the user object. Yeah, let me try if you're saying. Let me plug in the charger, otherwise my laptop will shut down. So let me change the name and send a put request. Nice. It's working. Okay. Yeah. So it's working.
So I have a doubt. So you said that the Marshall with converts, like if we say user.query.all, it converts that it shows that as well into a
Yeah.
object. But here when we did not type the user.first, before that it was showing some error, right? So,
Yeah.
so why is that so?
I mean, user. So as far as I know, the filter by returns a user object. I mean, query object. Yeah, I will just remove it and try to run and try to read that error.
Okay.
Marshall with URL for argument after must not be a mapping, not a base query. Must be a mapping. It says that the argument after double star must be a mapping, not a base query. I mean, this statement is of our interest. It says that the return statement of this statement, the filter by, is a base query. So I mean, Marshall will not be able to convert it in some object.
Oh, but it does convert it into that object if we say query.all.
Yeah, the query.all is the list of like user objects. That's not.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't return the query object, base query object. It's the list of user object.
User object. But it shouldn't matter, no? It shouldn't matter what type of object it is, because it is in if you go in depth, it is basically converting a non JSONable object, non JSON serializable object into a JSON serializable object.
Yes.
So in this case, it shouldn't matter. It should either way. It should convert it into a JSON serializable object. If that is what it does, Marshall with.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what is the construct of the base query object. I don't know, you are right, should not matter.
Mhm.
It should just return the I mean, it should return the null or zero, whatever the default value is. If
Yeah,
it will
yeah.
not, no, but I don't know how they have implemented it, the Marshall width. All I know, it returns. I mean, if you use Marshall width, I mean, you can use the Marshall width with any function.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary that you use it with this function only. You can use it with any function, but it returns a dictionary kind of structure from the collections module. I mean, I don't remember the exact name of that kind of dictionary, but it returns a structure which is very similar to the dictionary. And that is JSON serializable. So in some sense, it just returns a custom object in some form of dictionary. So maybe it is not able to convert that in that dictionary.
So like this might be some special case.
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
So we have already, I guess we have implemented this all the methods. We have deleted, updated, created, get. I mean, you can modify the implementation. You can check for the duplicates. Like if the ID is given, then you try to fetch the data from the database. So if the ID, if the user with that ID already exists, it will like return something. So you can always identify whether the resource of that ID exists or not. So you can check for the duplicates in the implementation of the post. So if the ID already exists, you can abort the program and say that I mean, the resource with that ID already exists with the 409. And if doesn't exist, then you can always create a resource. So I guess there is nothing more to cover. So should we close the session then, or anybody has any question?
Yeah, so one thing. So as you told that you'll share this code, is it possible to do it today itself, or it may take some time?
Yeah, I'll just push it on the Replit.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So should we close the session, or anybody wants, or someone wants to ask any question?
Excuse me, sir. In Replit, do we have to make some changes, or this code will work fine as in Replit also?
Yeah, it will work fine. But the only thing you need to change is inside the app.py, you need to specify the host 0.0.0.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Or maybe you will need to create the test database there. Or if you will upload the test database, then it will work fine there.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Does anybody has any question? So we will close the session now. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you, sir. So the Replit link will be shared in the portal, or like where exactly? Hello, sir, you there?